6:36, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Welcome on into Nashville's Morning News, March 21st. Again, it is Friday. Want to welcome on into the program EJ Haust joining us. EJ, I could not wait to get you on the air. Good morning. To get your opinion on, of course, Tim Walz, governor for the fine state of Minnesota. But he's been in the news, and there's a couple of angles I want to take here. But first, I want to play you a couple of audio bites. I'm sure that you are familiar with them. The first one is where he was on with Gavin Newsom, of course, on Newsom's podcast. And Walz basically said that Republicans are afraid of his masculinity.
But I think this notion of toxicity and masculinity needs to be separated. And I think it's been conflated. And I think we're going to have to work on that a little bit. And I think there is a crisis.
I think some of us scare them. I think I scare them a little bit why they spend so much time on it. No, I'm serious, because I can fix a truck. They know I'm not bullshit on this. Yeah. I'm not putting this in people's grill. I don't know if my identity is not hunting. My identity is not football coaching. My identity is not, a beard and a truck.
Then why does he keep talking about it, EJ? Like who started this whole thing about his masculinity in the first place? It was the left.
Yeah, I mean, he's a total clown show, right? And he's my favorite comedic relief from the news of the day, because every time he opens his mouth, we're reminded again about how utterly stupid this man is. What I found funny is in that particular clip, if you actually watch it, I'll see if I can find it and share it on X. But if you watch the clip, both of them have these extremely feminine kind of awkward hand motions when they speak. Now, I'm someone who also speaks with my hands, but I bet you I'm more masculine than they are when they speak. It's awkward. It's weird. They're trying to own this narrative as if they are not weird, but they truly are. And Walz in particular, I mean, my goodness, he is just the goofiest man in America. And I can say that as someone who lived in Minnesota for 12 years. I'm very familiar with his political history.
Well, number one, again, when you have to run around telling people how masculine you are, you're probably not. That's number one. Number two, you're right about that clip and that whole interview. I went ahead and reposted it to my ex as well. You can follow me at Dan Manda's Show. But for Walz, why is he suddenly making the rounds? I mean, that's part of what I find so interesting is, for the Democrats, Tim Walz should be a national disgrace, because he was part of what, for the Democrats, is a horrible thing. For us, it's a great thing. But Walz is part of the clown show that brought them Donald Trump. Why is he out there making the rounds?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is trying to save face, right, and rebrand himself. That's probably selfish on his part. But let's not forget, he was also funded and supported by little Soros. Alex Soros, George Soros' son, made quite the push for him. So I'm sure they're floating a whole bunch of people out there that will inevitably be rejected. This is what Democrats do. So he's kind of out there. Gavin Newsom is out there. Jasmine Crockett is out there. Like, there's a lot of people just kind of, gaining some news and attention and headlines. Eventually they'll solidify on someone who's a little bit more likable. So that it's almost like the Overton window, right? Like, go as far left as you possibly can, and then we'll get to somebody who's more reasonable by the time the election rolls around. That's, I think, what they're doing here. It's a playbook they've used before. And I don't think for a second that he's actually someone that they think is, the face of the Democrat Party. He's just a useful tool, a useful idiot for the moment.
You're right on both instances, a tool and an idiot. He also said this, speaking of being a tool, he said this about Tesla.
Saying on my phone, I don't know, some of you know this on the iPhone, they've got that little stock app. I added Tesla to it to give me a little boost during the day. 225 and dropping.
So that brings me to the next topic of conversation, of course, which is all of the vandalism of these Tesla dealerships and these Teslas all across the country, and I guess the world too, from what I understand. And so in one of the previous hours, I was talking about how the Democrats and you certainly know this from your experiences in Minnesota, where you lived for many years. The Democrats seem to use whatever reasoning they can to justify violence, and they're doing that here as well.
Sure. So, I'll get to the violence thing in just a sec. But, if Walz had a brain in his head and if he knew how to use that little app that he has on his phone that he's so excited about, he would see that Tesla stock is actually up 30% in the last 12 months. X just got valued over the original price, I believe, $44 billion or whatever, according to the Financial Times. So Elon Musk is doing just fine. He is not hurt by your silly little protests. Sadly, it's individual people who are hurt by these quote unquote protests. The state of Minnesota holds 1.6 million shares of Tesla stock.
Yep.
That pays for pensions and retirement for people in the state of Minnesota. So he's rooting against his own state, the people of his own state, arguably because it's probably government contracts and whatnot that are getting these pensions, people who probably voted for him. So it just goes to show how incredibly stupid they are. And I wanted to say that part first because these protests, we shouldn't call them protests. We should call them organized terror activities.
Yes.
Organized terrorism. They are also in that stupid category. And by that, I mean, it's not actually going to hurt Elon Musk to the point where he'll stop making Teslas or stop using rockets or stop saving people from this space station, right? Like his dreams and ambitions are way bigger than your silly little protests. The problem is these are dangerous and they are bound to hurt someone. So these organized terror activities that are happening tomorrow, from what I understand, Jasmine Crockett and a bunch of hollywackos, some weirdos, washed up, actors and whatnot, are pushing for these protests to happen across the country. There's several of them here right in Tennessee. So they want people to go there and supposedly protest. And I kept waiting for them to say the word peaceful, and I didn't hear it. So when in this little, they had a big call, like a Zoom call with a whole bunch of supporters, probably a bunch of George Soros organization leaders and whatnot. And so people could go on and listen to them say how they just want to protest these Tesla dealerships on a Saturday, which remember, Saturday is the day that people buy cars. Right. So these are not going to be empty dealerships. There will be people there. There'll be cleaning crew there after hours. These are not unmanned locations. It is bound to happen that someone is going to get hurt or killed as part of these quote unquote protests because they're not just standing there holding signs. They are blowing things up. They are shooting guns. They are intentionally trying to harm people and do massive amounts of vandalism and damage.
Well, and EJ, you're right. And we're not only talking about the dealerships, but we're also talking about some of the other things that we've seen individuals do when they see a Tesla on the street, whether it's keying their cars or, we're talking earlier about one guy that spread some feces on a car. I mean, these things, they're beyond reason. And so I'm going to ask you a question about that coming up. Got to check traffic. But most people, even moderates, and I would be willing to bet moderate Democrats and independents as well, look at this kind of behavior and they're shaking their head because this does seem to be irrational and way, way overboard when it's directed against a guy who just saved the astronauts, right? You've got that. And a guy who is doing everything he can to save America's economy. And I'm going to get your opinion on that straight ahead. 6:45, time to check the roads on WTN.
For the most part, things are looking good this morning. North of downtown, 65 southbound, slow approaching Trinity Lane. Earlier accident is clear. No problems on 24 or 40. No unusual delays on 440, 840 running accident free. I'm Christy O'Brien.
As far as your weather today, a high of 62, mostly sunny, right now 33. Saturday, sunny at 68. Sunday, storms, wind, hail, very slight chance of a tornado, high of 70 degrees. Your complete forecast is coming up at 7 o'clock on Super Talk, 99.7, EJ Haust. So, I don't know, do you think most normal people here in America, including moderate Democrats, if there is such a thing, moderate Democrats and independents, look at what the progressives are doing And they think that perhaps this will backfire because this behavior, nobody likes rudeness and nobody likes this kind of behavior.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people do like this kind of behavior, which is why it's happening kind of widespread across the country. Unfortunately, we've damaged people's brains, and I think COVID had a lot to do with that. There's a lot of PTSD there. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that Democrats almost always act in self-interest and the betterment of the party so that they can maintain their power. So if Democrats are like more reasonable, I don't think it has anything to do with like their love of humanity or like their sense of principle against damaging other people's property. I think it's from a place that is, well, this would look bad for our brand, right? That this will hurt people who are running for office in Democrat places or whatever. I don't think it's like rooted in the goodness of their heart. I think it's simply a calculated move. And there are people who are speaking out. Hakeem Jeffries has said, you know, he doesn't like some of the activities, some of the violence and some of the silliness that's happening in his party. You'll see Cuomo. Chris Cuomo had a podcast or something that he was talking about the same thing and talking about how, you know, the Democrats just don't get it, that we don't really care about the foibles of Trump. We care more about what he's trying to do. And so, you know, the majority of people want what this administration is doing. They want Elon Musk to be successful because it's an American company that hires American workers. So when you are damaging Tesla dealerships or cars or whatever, you are actually just hurting Americans. And that's a hard thing to overcome. So I think you'll see more and more Democrats coming on board to say, all right, let's tamp it down. Let's find a new boogeyman because this one isn't working. I mean, think of the arrogance of them to think they will, you know, quote unquote, take down Elon Musk, right? Like that's just an absurd thought. It's not going to happen. But if they can rechannel that energy to a place that is better for their brand, I think eventually they'll get there. I like that they're acting like lunatics. I just don't want them to hurt anyone.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. The Democrats, of course, going after Chuck Schumer after he decided to go ahead and support the continuing resolution. We also have the topic of conservatives being swatted as well. I mean, everywhere you look, there's like bad behavior on the side of the Democrats. However, we're going to leave it there. EJ, how do people find you on X?
Follow me at EJ Under the Radar.
All right, EJ, always great to have you on. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you again next week. 6:50 on Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Super text line is open at 615-737-9986. I didn't even get to ask EJ what she thought of John Rose running for governor, officially coming out and announcing his run yesterday. He had a great interview with Matt Murphy. I'm going to continue to play audio from that as the morning continues to unfold. By the way, coming up at 7:35, we're going to have State Rep Scott Sapicki. He's going to join us to talk about President Trump dismantling the Department of Education. What that means for us here in Tennessee is all straight ahead. Very busy morning on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Joan Jones has the news at 7. Hey, Joan.
Hey, Dan. Well, there's a new warning about the nation's bridges you'll want to know about. Also, we'll talk about John Rose throwing his hat into the ring for governor. Those stories coming up at 7 o'clock on Super Talk 99.7 W.